Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings, joined as always with Jason Ounpraseuth. And today, Jason, we thought we were going to talk a little bit about independent wrestling and kind of the state of the indies. There's a lot happening in wrestling. There's a lot of talent becoming available. In fact, just yesterday we found out a lot about a lot more talents that's becoming available. And it's a really interesting time in the indies. But this was your idea, Jason. So you kind of want to talk about like why you wanted to talk about this topic today?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I when I pitched this topic to you, I was not anticipating all of this news. And even when we did our Ring of Honor episode, we didn't anticipate Ring of Honor would just, go on hiatus and change the whole company. We also had, ideas of how Ring of Honor could improve, but this was not an idea, one of our ideas for them to basically become an independent company. But yeah, I mean, just because of that, the indie scene is seeing a lot of changes. Obviously, GCW has grown immensely. Since they were one of the few companies that ran during the pandemic, and so obviously a huge spotlight was brought on them. And then you have this huge talent influx coming in now, especially with these new recent releases. I have big names like Keith Lee, obviously Killer Cross. He's back on the market. I'm sure he's a big name that people will book. Ember Moon, of course, boosting up the women's scene as well in the indies, which is it's just a lot of inexperience on the indies. I think we did see a time in WWE where they were picking up a lot of people who quite frankly weren't really ready for the big times yet. You saw that because a lot of them weren't on TV right away, and now some of them are just being released. Like a Trey Baxter, Blake Christian. Now he's back on the indie scene because he's just working 205 Live for the most part. I think he was on TV a couple times, but I think even then it was just more of like a security guard role for the most part. It wasn't really as Trey Baxter, his name. And so all this influx of the talent in the indies is really making it interesting for these big super cards, all these big names, which you do need for your shows. Like Davey Richards is someone that's just making the rounds in the indies, and like every match of his is a big match. Whether it's in these local Texas indies or just the students he trains. Having like a 2D Lynn, I think her name is. That definitely has a big spotlight on her being a student of David Richards, and so that really helps out the indie scene having these big names associated with your shows.
Yeah, I think when you look at the indies over the past few years, I think we can go back to like say 2017 or so, and we can see in like, wow, the indies were really thriving. You had a bunch of different promotions with doing a bunch of different styles. You had, a tremendous independent scene in the United States. You had a tremendous independent scene in, Europe. You had a tremendous independent scene in Japan. You had independence in Mexico. You had all of these promotions across the world that were doing so well. And then three things happen. The first is WWE becomes extremely competitive when it comes to bidding for talents. Like you said, they would sign talent that was just beginning to make a wave on the independents, well before they were probably ready to be put on the main roster. And, Blake Christian's a good example. I mean, there's a ton you can really name. And some of them have worked out. Like some of them, like they snagged early, like Austin Theory. I wouldn't say like he's like a star now, but he's at least achieved something on the main roster. He wasn't just someone that was kind of in and out. But so that happens, and that drains the indies of a lot of talent. And the big thing is NXT UK comes and basically gobbles up a ton of the established UK talent. So the UK indies are tremendously hurt by that. You also have the speaking out scandal in the UK and the US, which we could maybe talk about a little bit later because I think that had some different types of consequences. But so WWE gets way more involved, and that hurts the indies because they're losing talent. The second thing that happens is AEW gets founded, and they steal a lot of talent from the indies. They sign up a lot of talent to exclusive deals, and they also give wrestling fans an alternative that isn't WWE, which is what got a lot of people into independent wrestling in the first place, which was they liked wrestling. They wanted to see something different than what they were seeing on WWE. So they went to their indies, whether that was attending the shows live or buying DVDs like I used to do, or now with IWTV and getting streaming service and all that. AEW comes along, kind of replaces the indies for some people as far as their consumption of it. And the last thing is the pandemic, which really hurt independent wrestling, which, look, I don't, it varies from promotion to promotion, but most indies are not running in the black. Most indies have a very slim margin of profit that they can make. And so they don't have these big $1 million TV deals that allows them to run without fans and still turn a profit like WWE or AEW or even a Impact or Ring of Honor, who have, a ton of money in the bank and can have good funding to support wrestling that's not in front of fans. A lot of indies don't have that ability to do that. So you got this whole thing where indies couldn't run. We saw indies shut down. We saw indies shut down for good. We saw some of them kind of do like, closed tapings where they would tape a few matches here and there, but that's not indie wrestling. It was just like these little things you were doing to try to help maybe some talent get some ring time during the pandemic. But, it was a lot of things that came to hurt independent wrestling. But, now that we're looking at not the end of the pandemic, but a time period where things have returned to normal as far as live events, we're seeing that some indies made it through the pandemic, that there's still an atmosphere that works. There's still promotions coast to coast in the US that are running regularly. There are, big independent matches happening. So the indies are still around, and now you're seeing more talent become available. It's kind of an inverse where WWE is shedding a lot of independent talents. And then you have Ring of Honor, who had talent on exclusive deals and talent that could work indies, but they couldn't be on, I think they couldn't appear on DVDs or streaming services or something like that. But those talent is coming out. So now you're getting a lot more talent back on the indies right at about the right time, where a lot of independent companies who maybe were dormant during the pandemic are starting back up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we live in Massachusetts, and so one of our local indies, Beyond Wrestling, they seem to be back running regular shows again, doing their Uncharted Territory weekly show, and they've announced some other big shows. With big stars like Matt Cardona, Ruby Riott. I think she's going to be on one of their shows as well. PWG, of course, like one of the pillars of independent wrestling. They seem to be back on their own sort of like bi-monthly, quarterly, shows that they would used to do on a regular basis. And of course, with I'm sure Excalibur with his AEW connections can get guys like Malachi Black in there as well, so helping out probably some of the younger talent that are on the undercard, while those guys take up the main events of that space there. And of course, Bandito is obviously one of their big stars in their promotion as well. And that's really the big thing, was the star power in the indies really dried up during that time with AEW and WWE, to where, like their talents that were on the indies, they weren't bad. It was just that they didn't have enough star power to really, command like their own show or something like that, to have any type of drawing power on their own. And AEW, they've seemingly been open to letting their talents work on the indies. Of course, guys like Joey Janela and Marco Stunt, they'll hop on GCW shows once in a while. And of course, like I said, Malachi Black, he'll do some indies as well. I think he's been announced for some West Coast indies as well. It just seems more like the executives, like the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega, I think they seem to be done with the indies. That's what they said before when they left for AEW, that okay, these are our last indie matches. We're just focused on AEW. But for the other talents, it does seem like, they're true independent contractors is basically what it is. They're allowed to work other promotions, just AEW takes priority for them. And WWE, with this huge amount of releases they've been doing these past 2 years basically, of when they're doing these mass cuts, it's really opened up more for the indies. And it's just more of a wait and see of how the effects will happen, because I think Brett Lauderdale kind of pointed this out, how there's only so many talents you can book on a show. You can't book everybody on your show as much as you would want. And so it's very curious to see which talents sort of stand out more than others, and which ones are sort of, I guess, more motivated to really prove WWE wrong, that they're wrong to release them.
Yeah, the talent thing is interesting, because what you would have during the pandemic and during the height of like AEW and WWE hoarding, independent talent, not hoarding independent talent, but having a lot of talent and signing a lot of talent to exclusive deals. was you would get on the independents, you would get like a lot of these, like if you're like a fan of like national independent wrestling, like you're really into indies, you're not just watching one indie, but you'll watch kind of, oh, if Defy Wrestling is having a good card, you'll watch that. Or if there's a big GCW show, or there's a big Black Label Pro show, or there's a big Beyond show, just kind of various indies around the country. You basically saw the same people on all of these shows, like a couple talent who, for whatever reason, had not been signed to WWE or AEW or Ring of Honor or Impact, or Impact guys would do some shots, but you know what I mean? Like it was, Nick Gage, who's not going to get a full-time national contract deal. It was Ricky Shane Page. It was AJ Gray, who hasn't been signed. It was these guys, and all of these guys have their own appeal and everything like that. It's not like they're these total wastes of talents, although some people will might think that about the deathmatch guys. But it was just like you kind of saw them everywhere, and there was almost no difference between the indie promotions outside of the undercard talent, which tended to be like local talents. But there wasn't like a ton of, there was like every big show in independent wrestling felt like it had the same like 6 or 7 guys, and women mixed in to it. And I'm happy now that if we're going to get a more influx of talents, that the cards are going to diversify a little bit. Talent, there's going to be more star power on these shows. There's going to be more good veteran wrestling on these shows. Like you talked about Davey Richards kind of coming out of retirement. Like that was a huge deal that Davey would come out of retirement from wrestling and just go do indies. And because he was such a good worker, and he's a guy that can help young and up and coming talent. And he was just a different guy to be on the scene. And he was another guy that you could bring in if you were an independent promoter and be like, oh yeah, this is our main event. We're bringing in Davey Richards for the show. Like, oh, that's cool, because I haven't seen Davey Richards versus this guy before, or he's not on every independent show. And I think that helps a lot just from the overall appeal of the indies. It gives each kind of promotion more flexibility for the big matches that they can have, for the kind of talent that you're going to see on each show. There's just way more variety, and hopefully that will continue in the future. I don't know what the plans are for these recently released WWE talents, or the Ring of Honor talent. Some of them might not want to wrestle that frequently. Some of them might be done with wrestling completely. Some of them might get signed by AEW. So we don't really know what's going to happen with any of them, but at least in theory, a lot of them will be, in the mix or available if promoters choose to do so. And I think that's a huge plus for independent wrestling. It makes it a lot more exciting for me as a fan, thinking about, I'm really happy to see, even someone like Blake Christian, like who was making a name for himself in the independents. He gets signed to WWE, and it's like, well, that's it for Blake Christian. He's going to go to NXT, and maybe he'll be on 205 Live, and he gets the new name Trent Baxter. But he gets released, which I, feel bad that he got released if WWE was his dream. And obviously it was a safe, steady paycheck for him. But now it's like, oh, I'm glad Blake Christian is back, because now he can wrestle back on the indies. He can wrestle some of these other guys from other promotions that have been released. He can wrestle some maybe newer names that have kind of broken out since, he left for WWE. And it's a real boon to the indies, I think, that we're seeing these guys come out and wrestle for them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the Ring of Honor news really shakes things up as well, especially for like the promotions that can give exclusive contracts, at least semi-exclusive, guys who can like sign people to contracts. And we're talking like MLW, Impact, and those kind of outside of WWE and AEW. It's very interesting for those promotions, whether how long they lock up these guys, whether they'll sign long-term deals, whether anyone actually wants to sign a long-term deal at this point with these other companies. Obviously New Japan, with New Japan Strong, I'm very curious to see how they'll react to this for the US expansion, how aggressive they will be on all this and such there. And even MLW has their own, releases as well. Tom Lawler is now a free agent. What's he going to do next? He seems pretty open to doing more indies, and, he's kind of left it up in the air whether he'll actually sign somewhere else. But still, yeah, that's another name that can make the rounds in the indies. And, he's kind of already he's like Black Label Pro champion, I think he is still. And so that's really another interesting name there. But yeah, like you said, all these new names helps, elevate some of like the local talents, like Brian Keith, from New Texas Pro, that champion there. He's a really impressive talent, and he's had some big matches with some established names, and it's really helping out boost his stock as well as a local talent over in that promotion. And so like I do agree with you. Like it does really help all these local talents to help elevate their profiles, and potentially maybe they'll get signed by a big company.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of the independent wrestling experience is young youth development, young talent development. And if WWE is out on indie talent, that's a big game changer, because at this point, WWE is the only company that has like real exclusive contracts where if anyone signs with them, they basically can't wrestle anywhere else. Everyone else, whether it's AEW or New Japan or Impact or MLW, those talents still can appear on the indies, on a regular basis, pretty much. Like, I know, like, I'm going to look this up real quick, but like Lee Moriarty, right? He was a well-known indie guy on the rise, was one of those guys that would pop up on like every kind of indie show, like I was talking about, like kind of like, oh, we're bringing Lee Moriarty in and he's going to wrestle AJ Gray, or he's going to wrestle ACH. I know ACH is kind of in and out of wrestling at this point, but he was like one of those guys. But so he gets signed to AEW, but it's not like he's disappeared from independent wrestling. He's been wrestling pretty regularly on the independents. I'm just looking at, his October, right? This is a tape match. I think he worked a match for MLW. He worked for a promotion I'm reading is called Enjoy Night Moves, Enjoy Wrestling. He worked for Raise the Bar Wrestling in California. He worked for AAW in the Chicago area. Like and that's just in October, but he's like, yeah, he's working dark, and he worked an episode of Rampage against Bobby Fish, but he's still in independent wrestling. He's still going around. He's still working with guys. It's not like, he's disappeared the way like someone would be if they signed with WWE. And so if WWE is out on independent wrestling and they're not going to be signing people like Lee Moriarty, then there's no reason why the indies cannot remain very vibrant with talent, because the talent's not necessarily going away. Obviously, signing with AEW or signing with New Japan, the talent's going to be less available because they have this new company that's a first priority, and they're probably making more money, so they maybe don't want to work as much and do the travel and the physical labor of wrestling a lot. But you still have the people that are around, like Joey Janela, who's a huge, independent wrestling guy and a supporter of independent wrestling. Like, yeah, he signs with AEW, and yeah, he wrestles in AEW, but he's all over the independents. He's promoting his own shows on the independents. Like, he's still very much a fixture on the independents, despite, being someone who's been with AEW since the start of the company. And to me, that makes a big difference to these. I mean, obviously Moxley is a similar thing, where Moxley is this enormous wrestling star who's out there working the independents because he wants to, definitely not because he's making like way more money on the indies, because he wants to. And that's really valuable, because not only is he coming in and he's having, he's wrestling with different guys, but just having him on your card is really helpful to these younger guys who are hoping to get noticed. It's really helpful to, I think I don't know if he did this. I think he did do this show in Iowa over the weekend. He wrestled Jimmy Jacobs at like a promotion in Iowa. Did he actually wrestle? Because I know Moxley obviously checked into rehab. I don't know if he actually did that show, but he was talking about it. He was booked for it. But like, it's just like he's just doing random indies, like, and that's beneficial to all of independent wrestling when a guy like that is willing to come down and do those kind of, work for those promotions and do those kind of matches. And I don't again, if WWE's out on signing independent talent, then the indies don't have to really worry about losing talent that much, because the talent, even if they do sign with AEW, are still likely to be around, at least for a little while.
Yeah, that's kind of a quick question about for AEW is that we're approaching 2022, and that's when a lot of AEW talents who have signed 3-year contracts are going to expire. Do you see another sort of, I guess, a boom, for lack of a better word, for that, if talents don't get re-signed? Because obviously I I doubt like AEW will have like 100% re-sign rate for these talents that did have signed 3-year contracts.
Yeah, I mean, the way that AEW has um, acquired talents and held on to talents, I mean, the list of AEW releases is very small.
Yep.
It's almost entirely, related to either people requested their release or, a personal issue. But they hold on talent. So I would assume that some of the talent that signed 3-year deals would be resigned. And I think that there are definitely people in AEW who have been with the company for a little while that maybe aren't happy with how they're being used, that want to go do something else, because you're never going to be able to satisfy 100% of your roster. Maybe there's talent out there that thinks they need to be pushed more, that they think they can be a big star. And I think some of those people will leave. I don't see like this huge wave of people who don't resign. Just because, especially if WWE is like, we don't take talent from the indies anymore, do those kind of undercard names from AEW like look like they're going to be big candidates in WWE? Like if I'll use Kip Sabian as an example, it's just a guy who signed with AEW from the get-go that was on TV. I know he got injured. I don't know if he's cleared yet. But is there really a role for Kip Sabian right now in AEW? It doesn't really appear so. It seems like he kind of ran his storyline with Miro, and maybe he comes back and does something else. But he's maybe a guy that's like, you know what, I'm done with AEW. I think I could be more somewhere else. Is that someone who's going to go to WWE? I don't really think so. He doesn't really fit their profile, and he's, even though he was in AEW, he's an indie guy. So maybe he does go, he goes back, maybe he goes to Europe, maybe he stays in the US and does indie shows there, but I don't really see a ton of talent that could be leaking out of AEW. I don't know, do you have anyone like in mind in particular, or people that you think might be not wanting to resign?
I mean, yeah, look, obviously those names kind of pop up, like a Kip Sapien, obviously maybe Joey Janela. I don't know, like, he seems kind of, back and forth with the AEW and the indies. I don't know whether he just wants to, maybe feels, financially comfortable at this point, just wants to do indies and doesn't really want to, be in AEW anymore, because he's not really doing much in AEW for anyway. I mean, he has this storyline of Sonny Kiss, who is another person who's like, the AEW just seems very slow in developing on. And so I don't know what their feelings are internally. It could be, they're happy with where they're at. They're enjoying this wave of AEW and they just want to be part of the ride. They don't really care what their role is. And that could definitely be a factor as well, where they're just, want to ride the wave of AEW's forward momentum. And they don't really care where they are on the card. They just want to be part of this momentum swing. But yeah, obviously you mentioned Kip Sabian, he has the option to go in Europe, but we mentioned earlier how like NXT UK seems to sucked up all of that, and it's kind of odd that there hasn't been any releases from that promotion. So I think I saw a joke on Twitter that John Laurinaitis doesn't know how to work a 4-4 number. We're too afraid to ask, and that's why there's no NXT UK releases. And so I don't know, there hasn't really been any, and so I don't know what their strategy is over there, especially with how NXT in the US has changed so much. I don't know if that has to do with anything with the UK, or whether someone in the front office just forgot that NXT UK exists.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a theory that like the labor laws are different in the UK and it'd be harder to release the talent
Oh, okay, yeah,
in the
makes
UK
sense.
based on if then because they have different types of contracts because it's a UK based promotion.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's true, just a rumor that I've heard. It might be that that John Laurinaitis doesn't know how to contact people. He doesn't have WhatsApp, I guess, so he
Yeah.
can't reach out to the people in other countries. But yeah, with as far as talent goes, and that's one of the benefits of AEW being open with independence, and is that someone who maybe doesn't feel like they're being used and they want to wrestle has the option to wrestle a lot on the independents and still work for AEW. And that's a powerful thing. A lot of a talent, I'm sure talent like the security of an AEW contract. They like that their check clears. They don't have to, they're not working for a hot dog and a handshake. Like they would like the stereotype on the independents is, but you can also, wrestle if you want to wrestle, like you want to get in the ring. Like there was the whole thing with Mike Bennett. Like Mike Bennett was in WWE and he just wanted to wrestle. He's like, we want to just wrestle. Like, I don't care what, where I'm doing it. Put me on 205 Live, put me on the NXT house shows in Florida. Like, I just want to get in the ring and wrestle. And for whatever reason, they were like, no, we're just going to send you home. Like, that drives some people crazy. These guys are wrestlers. They have pride. They want to perform their art in front of people. And when they're denied that, it can be frustrating. So having that outlet where it's like, look, we don't have you on TV this week. We don't have any plans for you in creative, but we do like you. We want to keep you around. But having an option where it's like, if you want to wrestle, go get booked on the independents. And pretty much everyone in AEW could get booked on the independents. Because they have a name from TV and they've probably been on the independents before and they have connections there. And I think that helps because if it scratches that itch where these guys can kind of double dip, where it's like, yeah, I have the security of an AEW paycheck. Maybe I'm not where I want to be in that promotion, but I can go out in the indies. I can have fun. I can experiment with different stuff that maybe I can take back to AEW. I think that's a powerful thing. And I think it's a smart thing to do. There's some risk involved. You risk your talent maybe getting injured if they're working an independent show and they're working with inexperienced people. There's no medical staff there or any other, hurdles of working on an independent show can provide. But I do think that it's a real benefit to AEW to have that philosophy as opposed to WWE where they're like, we'll just send you home. Like, don't worry, like just keep your paycheck and be happy. Like you don't need to work. And I think that can be frustrating for a lot of talent. And that's why I kind of think like, if you're an AEW talent and you have the option to resign, or you maybe go to the independents full time, what would be the motivation to do that when you can work the full independence and still, have the security of working in AEW as well?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. And just going back to the focus on the indie wrestling, I mean, just with the way the talents are released now, I think Biff Buziak, he has a 90-day no compete clause, and that's in February that's going to be released, and so that's just in time for like a couple months before WrestleMania weekend, which is a big revenue gainer for all these independent promotions. Like back when 2020, when the pandemic first hit, that I know that was a huge loss for the independents to not have that WrestleMania weekend, which is all the tourists, all the other people that just go for independent shows, other than just WrestleMania, of course, to go there. And so potentially in a couple months from now, when things start to open up a little bit more, obviously most people in the US are vaccinated. I don't know what the official number is, but it's a good majority, and so you're probably going to get a huge influx of people going to WrestleMania weekend in Texas, I think it is, this year. Or next year. And so that's going to be a huge revenue streamer for all these independent promotions, and you're going to have potentially a lot of huge names in that weekend working like 10, 12 shows, and that's going to be a huge boost for the indies, I think, especially because WrestleMania weekend, that's usually a time where all these indie names blow up and they become mainstream names, because they're working so many shows, so many matches. And so that's gonna be a huge boost for the indies in a couple months from now, once they're able to do this huge WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, that's WrestleMania weekend has always been the biggest weekend for independent wrestling for the reasons you highlighted. In 2020, just totally didn't happen at all. Obviously WrestleMania was in a warehouse, so that kind of tells you what happened. In 2021, there was a WrestleMania weekend. It didn't have nearly the amount of buzz or anything that other previous installments of it had, but it did exist, and I did watch a decent amount of the shows that did take place. But yeah, 2022 feels like, because independent wrestling is back, because all these promotions are running again, barring some form of crazy new wave or strain of the virus, does feel like it's going to be back, especially when you think about the talent that's going to become available. And obviously is a huge boon for independent wrestling. It's where people discover new names. It's where people discover new promotions. And it is a huge deal, and it'll be really exciting to see it come back. I watched a decent amount of the 2021 WrestleMania weekend stuff. I watched, GCW's major show. I watched, Bloodsport. I watched the Southern Underground Pro show, SUP, in Nashville, out of Nashville. And I was really didn't think it was any of the stuff was very good. There was some talent that I liked on the shows, but it just, and part of it was the atmosphere, not a lot of people, everyone's wearing a mask, people aren't making as much noise. Part of it was that, and part of it was just like, it does feel like we're really grasping at straws here with a lot of what we have left in the independents. It's a lot of death match stuff, which I enjoy, the occasional death match and stuff. I'm not like a total person where I'm like, death match is garbage wrestling, but it's like, okay, I'm going to watch this big GCW show and there's like 4, deathmatch style matches on the show. And it just seems like kind of a lot. It's just not, I know GCW has a really, really, really successful model for independent wrestling. They've got a huge cult following. I know cult is kind of like a negative term because it implies that it's like very small and not particularly successful, but they have a huge following. They draw very well for an independent promotion. They tour around the country. It's just, I'm not a huge GCW fan. I think that it's just a little too like rough around the edges for me. I don't think the commentary is very good. I think a lot of the matches are like pointless and like I said, like we're gonna have 4 death matches on one show. It's not my type of professional wrestling. But I respect the hustle that's gone involved into getting that promotion to be as successful as it has, especially during the pandemic. But I wasn't like blown away by the independent talent. Like after I kind of got through like watching all the WrestleMania weekend shows, I kind of like closed my laptop and I was like, that's enough independent wrestling for now. But I've come back and forth, and I think something really important about independent wrestling that kind of died in the last few years and hopefully will be coming back. And we can talk about Beyond in a minute, because I think Beyond is one of the better promotions at doing this, is an independent wrestling company that runs frequently enough to establish storylines and tell stories and help talent really get over, as opposed to being these promotions that just kind of, we're going to put together a card. These guys are going to wrestle. They're going to work hard. It's going to be entertaining. But I think like 2 promotions that we lost in the past few years that did this really well were Evolve and Chikara. And, Evolve dies because WWE gets involved. Gabe Sapolsky leaves. He goes and works with WWE, but he's also kind of doing Evolve. And it just felt like Evolve became like this like minor league for NXT, and Evolve, closes up shop. And that was too bad, because Evolve was a promotion that was running, I think they would do like 2 shows, and they work like 1 weekend a month. Basically, they do 2 shows for every month. But, they had storylines, they had angles, they had these stables, they had, guys with long title reigns who then lost the title to somebody. Like it was a more naturally, traditionally booked promotion than just, here's your super indie that has a bunch of names that you might recognize having random matches. And maybe one of the matches is for some title or something, but it's mostly just names tossed together. And we lost that. And Chikara, obviously separate issues of speaking out, Mike Quackenbush becoming persona non grata, a bunch of the talent from Chikara leaving, all sorts of reasons. But Chikara was one of those promotions that would be booking very intricate storylines that would have these kind of things. And I know a lot of people maybe didn't care for Chikara's product, but it was more like a real wrestling promotion than just like a company that is just putting together cards. And there's nothing wrong with putting together cards, but I do think that that's a gap that exists in independent wrestling. And I'm happy that Beyond is back, because Beyond, they just started their 3rd season of Uncharted Territory, which is their weekly show on IW TV. And, that's a weekly wrestling show. It's got storylines, it's got, matches that, mean things and that kind of thing. And I think that's really important for independent wrestling. It's important for the individual talent to learn in that kind of environment. And it's important for fans to feel like invested in certain matches, as opposed to just kind of watching, bouncing around from indie to indie, watching whatever match looks good on paper, as opposed to really feeling some sort of investment in the matches. And I hope that, with Evolve and Chikara kind of off the grid, and who knows what Ring of Honor is going to look like, if more promotions can kind of step up into that role and get away from just kind of being the, oh, here's a card promotion.
Yeah, definitely. I felt WrestleMania weekend this year was a lot of that. You had these big tournaments, and it was just a bunch of matches put together. And the hot and humid Florida weather certainly didn't help a lot of people. A lot of people were gassed right
And they're
away in certain.
outside
Yeah,
because of
exactly.
the
And so,
pandemic. Some
yeah,
they're outside or the windows are open air venues.
yeah, so that didn't help. It made matches very sloppy. And, only a few talents stood out, like Daniel Garcia, Kevin Koo. I think those are two guys that stood out for me during that weekend. But still, that's a very short list of people who stood out, which is not usually the norm. You usually get a couple more names that stand out on WrestleMania weekend. But yeah, I agree. GCW, I respect the hustle. I respect what they're doing. But yeah, sometimes they hold out these these cluster matches. These like 6, 8, people matches, which are just nothing to me. People do cool moves. Shane Mercer, throws people around. That's very fun to watch. But still, like they're not really doing a story with Shane Mercer. It's just Shane Mercer tosses people around, which is fun the first time you see it. But the next couple times you see it on a show, it's whatever.
And Shane Mercer is where I think Shane Mercer is awesome, by the way.
Oh
But
yeah,
like
I agree.
when Shane Mercer is doing his Shane Mercer spot 10 different matches in one weekend, it could become um,
Yeah.
a challenge. Yeah, well, it's like, and the other thing about WrestleMania weekend last year, which is reflective of the pandemic, is I don't know how much money these independent promotions had for talent, and you would see that where you would be like, a talent would appear because it used to be in the long ago, the good old days of the mid 2000s and WrestleMania weekends, you would have talent like um, Will Ospreay or Jeff Cobb or Matt Riddle or whoever, like, and they would work like 12 matches in like 3 days because that's how many shows there were, and they could be on every show, and they would, and that was really great because those guys were top talents and all that. And I thought, like, I don't know, like this independence, like you could look at the WrestleMania weekend card and you can be like, oh, Jordan Grace is here and she's only doing one match, and then what? She's going home. Like we have like a crappy women's match on like every single one of these shows. Like, and we can't find like more room for Jordan Grace. Like, and there were a lot of people like that. Ace Austin, I think, was another one who only worked like one show the whole weekend. I was like, you guys can't have room for like Ace Austin. So it's like, like these guys who I think were like really overqualified and could have helped a lot of these shows just didn't. And I think part of that might be just like they have those talent have a certain price to hit. If you want to book me, it's X amount of dollars. And a lot of these indie companies that were risking a lot going down to Florida, and nobody knew how big the turnout was going to be for the independent shows. Yeah, and so they didn't book a lot of high price talent. It was a lot of like like, can Jordan Oliver work 25 matches in 2 days kind of thing? Because, comes cheaper than other talent. And I do hope that maybe with the return of a steadier independent wrestling environments locally, that when it comes to WrestleMania season talent, they'll be more open to bringing in maybe some more high price talents. I mean, we haven't talked about this yet, but like Minoru Suzuki's like just these New Japan guys are now like taking turns spending a month. Like, I know Ishii is coming, I think in November, but like, and they're working independent dates. And I mean, those guys Minoru Suzuki's not working for $40 at these independent shows. So they are willing to spend money domestically, at least. I say domestically, but locally on there, to bring in talent. So hopefully that's reflected at WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, I mean, Okada's got a match this weekend in Japan with Tama Tonga for a power struggle, and then I guess next week he's going to be at Dead Nation. They haven't announced a match for him yet, but if he's around for at least like a couple of weeks or so, I don't know how long he's going to be in the U.S., but still, like, that be potentially another New Japan guy tour. Okada just touring around the Indies just with the V4 belts.
I'd be surprised if Okada was working
Yeah,
the Indies.
I agree, but that's still like one can dream.
Yes.
But yeah, but like with like like you said before, like promotions running stories like beyond wrestling. Right now they got an interesting story going on with Trisha Dora, where she's like sort of in a storyline, trying to with her back and forth there, and it's very meaningful. Like the fans are very into it. They're all in on Trisha Dora, and they're that's how you help build a star on the Indies, is with these small stories. They don't have to be very elaborate. They don't have to be all these epic sort of things. I remember before speaking out, of course, David Starr and Joey Janela had their feud in Beyond Wrestling, and it was epic. I was at that, the blow off at Americarana. It was a huge match there, and it was a story they could build around. Of course, speaking out, David Starr is pretty much out of wrestling because of that, but still, that was a storyline that they built around those two guys, and it was very compelling. It was very exciting, and the crowd was just into it the whole time. The whole story, they're into it.
Yeah, and as much as as knocking GCW for doing a lot of like the
Oh yeah, of course.
a lot of like the oh, here's a cards kind of stuff, but they did produce, the Nick Gage versus Ricky Shane Page storyline was a really big storyline that fan base was really into, and when they had their big blow off match at WrestleMania weekend, it felt like a really big deal. Yep. They also did the Matt Cardona. Mark Cardona wins the GCW title and kind of like hams it up as like the soft WWE internet guy who's winning like the hardcore death match stuff. And those are really successful bits. Like those got a lot of attention online. I don't know like how well they ultimately drew, or if they got people, more people buying the watching them on iPay-per-view or whatever. But those were successful angles. And like you mentioned, the Trish Adora stuff and Uncharted and past, really big feuds that have happened in certain promotions. AEW in Chicago, I know does a lot of stuff as far as like just booking consistently. It really comes down to how a lot of times how frequently you're running. Beyond has Uncharted territory every week. So they are obviously going to do storylines week to week to keep people, invested, as opposed to just trying to put out a new card every week. But I think that's something that's really important, independent wrestling on a lot of different ways. I wanted to change gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about like you mentioned, like David Starr and speaking out. And if Joey Ryan being another one, we did lose some of these names on the independents that were, before all these allegations, Joey Ryan and David Starr were really big deals on the independents. I mean, they were probably like David Starr was probably the best American independent wrestler in the world. He was like, obviously very big and passionate about being independent and all that kind of stuff like that. But that's another thing that indies have had to deal with. And it has to do, there's a big, much broader conversation about the culture around independent wrestling, how safe it is for people. Can people who are predators exploit independent wrestling? And the answer is yes. Unfortunately, that we've learned. And, it totally, NXT UK did a number on the UK indie scene, but the amount of talent in the UK that came up and speaking out was a really big deal, and really submarined what was an incredibly vibrant community, along with, NXT UK and the pandemic and that kind of thing. So you can't blame it all on Speaking Young, but it was a really significant moment at the independent wrestling level. And it did take away some people who were really big deals in independent wrestling. And it is just going to take some time for the indies to rebuild with those, rebuild new stars to kind of replace those people that just, have been abruptly, fallen off the face of the earth.
Yeah, I mean, Joey Ryan was like the leading example of a guy who, like, you can always point to him and say, oh, you can make a living on the indies, because Joey Ryan was living on the indies, I think probably at the expense of many others, probably, just ruining people's lives in the process of doing that. Obviously he got his own promotion, Bar Wrestling, which is, a pretty popular promotion in the West Coast, just like maybe not as popular as PWG, of course, but still like pretty popular promotion that got to book a lot of big stars. And so that was obviously a big loss there, just another promotion lost, one of the less place to get bookings from. But yeah, Joey Ryan, of course, he had this, he was friends with the Young Bucks and all those guys as well. That helped his influence as well. And so, it really changed a lot from the indies, just a perception wise of who knows what's going on in the indies, with all these other smaller promotions as well. It just really added a dark cloud on that. It does seem to be emerging from that. It's, I think a lot of independent wrestlers are very passionate to try to create a very safe community for everyone. I think Effie is really big on that, with his Big Gay Brunch show. I know, it seems to be a lot of people, when in those communities, the LGBT community really find, good safe space with those shows. I think A lot of people have talked about that, how like, oh, they feel very welcomed in those environments. All those, especially all those other like GCW branded shows, like the ones that AJ
The
Gray
collective.
has. Yeah, the collective, basically. Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone does feel welcomed in those shows, and that's very, very important. That's for not only for fans but also for wrestlers as well.
Yeah, and I'll give more credit for GCW and the collective and Brett Lauderdale for pushing that, because I found those to be some of the most interesting shows
Yep.
on WrestleMania weekend, and when they do these kind of independent special shows, because they're different in a lot of ways. I found the For the Culture shows very interesting, and even something like Bloodsport, just what are we going to do that's different? There's nothing like Bloodsport.
Mhm.
So it becomes really interesting, and it's really worked because I think they are doing this thing that no mainstream wrestling company is doing and no other independent wrestling company is doing, which is we're going to do these, shoot style matches. And I think that's a huge success for them. And GCW gets a lot of credit for being diverse and promoting that kind of atmosphere and taking chances on ideas. I mean, the first Joey Janela Spring Break, which is like, we're going to run a wrestling show starting at 12:30 a.m.
Yep.
On a Saturday night before WrestleMania, or maybe a Friday night before WrestleMania, like that was a gamble, and it turned into this huge successful thing that led to a lot more of these kind of specialty shows. And how are we going to make these kind of shows different? And they've, had, like you mentioned, the Effie's Big Gay Brunch, that does make a difference in people's lives. I'm not going to say it's drawing huge money and it's turning the independents around, but it is something that the independents have been able to offer that other promotions, who maybe have a larger platform, aren't.
Yeah, I mean, all these things are just, first steps. Ali Cat or Ali Catch has her own show of like featuring all women, and it just, she does a good job at spotlighting, the smaller independent wrestlers and the women's scene. The match quality isn't always great, but still, I think that just I think the focus isn't really on that for them. It's just more spotlighting, these smaller independent wrestlers and giving them a good spotlight, because GCW, it provides a really good spotlight. It's one of the top indies. If you're on that show, it really helps build up your reputation in some type of way, especially if you have a good match on those shows.
Yeah, I mean, you can point to any independent promotion and see, oh, here's a talent that they had, and now they're, in AEW or WWE. Look at, Top Flight was a promotion that was a team that popped up on GCW, and they popped up on I think they were on one of the For the Culture. I want to say they were on the For the Culture show in Indianapolis that they had last year. And all of a sudden, they're getting a match on Dynamite, and all of a sudden they're signed to AEW. I remember, and that's it's great for that talent, but that is something, even though that they can still maybe use them, it is something that the independents have to live with. I have an example I was talking to Drew Cordero, who is the promoter of Beyond Wrestling. And he was saying, like, yeah, we know every 3 months we're going to have to like rebuild someone because someone else will get picked up. And that's just what happens. And he told me, he said, Layla Hirsch, she's been wrestling in Germany. She's coming back. And she's going to be signed by somebody in, X amount of months, because we're going to have her regularly. We're going to feature her regularly, and she's going to be signed by somebody very quickly. And that's exactly what happened. She came back to wrestle matches on Beyond, and then she was on AEW Dark, and then she's on AEW, and now she's signed to AEW, and I believe she's still doing independence. But it's just one of those things where it's a reality, is that if you are doing a good job and you are spotlighting good talents, that the talent's going to be acquired, and maybe then come back and work for you sometimes. But it is a reality of working independence, is that constantly needing to find new talents. And that could be a challenge during the pandemic, where maybe less people are going to wrestling school and less people are working regularly, or people don't want to work shows at all. It can definitely be a challenge. And maybe that's one of the reasons we're looking at the WrestleMania weekend shows from this past year and be like, a lot of these shows weren't that good and a lot of them lack talent. And it's like, well, yeah, talent maybe hasn't had the best chance to develop, in the last, 18 months.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it from like a soccer perspective. Like I'm a fan, I'm a Fulham fan, and Alexander Mitrovic, a forward for that team, has had a fantastic season. I'm already resigned to the fact that he'll probably get signed by a bigger team someday, in the Premier League, maybe by a Tottenham or something like
Mhm.
that. Yeah, like a big team's gonna sign him because he's having a fantastic season for Fulham, who's a smaller club. They probably can't afford to keep him forever, and so they're eventually gonna have to sell him to a bigger club, and that's kind of the reality for independent wrestling as well. They're pretty much the smaller English clubs, from the championship, or a team from like the Bundesliga 2. Like eventually they're gonna get signed to the bigger teams like a Bayern Munich someday. And that's AEW and WWE. They're the Bayern Munichs, and everyone else is the Hamburgs, or the Vertebrate. That's the kind of the reality of it, and obviously for some fans that's kind of a tough reality to stomach, because you selfishly want to see these talents in independent wrestling. But eventually it's going to happen, where WWE, especially at this point, with them, with their positive independent wrestling. But AEW, of course, they're always looking to grow. They're looking to look at the future, obviously. That's why they signed guys like Lee Moriarty, Wheeler Yuta, and Daniel Garcia. They're looking to the future, and obviously they have the younger talents as well: Sammy Guevara, Darby Allin, MJF. They're looking ahead at their promotion, because obviously guys like CM Punk, Bryan Danielson, Jericho, they're not going to be around forever. And so they're looking towards the future. And, it's just the reality of it, where a young guy's going to get signed because, they see a lot of potential in them.
Yeah, and I think you'll see, like, at least from AEW's perspective, like, again, using Lee Moriarty as an example, but you could use um, others as an example as well. These guys that they signed that are under 25 years old, those guys are working a lot of independence still, because they know that ring time is really important for these guys. You don't want to sign someone who's at a formative age in their career and then stick them in a warehouse where they maybe do some drills, or they're sitting at home, or they're working these short matches on dark, which is what WWE would do. You want, okay, Lee, you want to, yeah, we'll have you on dark and we'll have you on Rampage once in a while, but we know you're a long-term project for us. Go out and have independent matches. And I don't know if that's Lee Moriarty wanting to do that. I don't know if that's a directive from someone, high up in the company saying, we want you to go out and get booked places, but it is something to make sure that those guys have plenty of matches. I was at Dynamite last Wednesday, the show in Boston, and I was sitting next to Josh Nason, works for Figure 4 Online Wrestling Observer, and we were kind of talking about talent development and like what will it be like. And we were watching the Dante Martin Matt Sydal match, and it's like, what, they're really big on, let's get Dante Martin matches. He wrestles almost every week on like Dynamite or Rampage. He's not someone that they're just like, all right, he's going to work once a month, like some of their other talent that they have that they're not really pushing. But they're really obviously like, this is a guy with a lot of potential. We got to get him ring time. And I don't know if he's working the independents right now, but he stood out to me as a guy, like you said, a young guy who's got all this potential, but he needs ring time. And can the independents provide that for him? And can it provide it for these other talents? And I think that's key. I think it's big for the male talents. It's really big for the women, I think, who a lot of times are signed with way less experience than the men. But it is an interesting aspect of how the independents can mute in the AEW can mutually benefit from each other.
Yeah, I mean, just use the soccer analogy again. It's like the loan system for
Exactly.
big clubs. Like a club like Chelsea. Like they'll loan a Billy Gilmore to another team because they don't think he's ready for first team action, but they'll play a young guy like Mason Mounts, because they see a future star in him. And Mason Mounts is like their Dante Martin, and Billy Gilmore is like whichever, like a Lee Moriarty for them. They see future talent for him, but he's not ready for first team minutes yet, and so they'll just loan him out to a smaller club, and they'll see from there. And that's exactly it. It's just the AEW will take their time, and they'll use the independents as a developmental system, basically, because they don't really have one for themselves. And of course, for the women talent, Thunder Rosa has their own promotion, Mission Pro Wrestling, and obviously, they've allowed AEW talent on her show. They'll let her, they'll let Thunder Rosa use their talent to help develop as well. And so it's just really a huge symbiotic relationship between the AEW and the indies.
Yeah, and I think that is a key aspect to keeping talent happy, obviously, and also improving talent. I do wonder long term if another company comes in and kind of fills the void. We haven't really seen, well, I do want to say one thing about the AEW indie relationship is that we haven't really seen it go horribly wrong yet, in the sense that we haven't had a major injury, like on an independent show that an AEW star got happened, but that's probably going to happen at some point. We haven't seen it really be challenged yet. So I do wonder if that does happen, if does that change Tony Khan or any of the executives in AEW's perspective of, are we letting these guys go? Should we let these guys go to these indies? Maybe they restrict them to indies that they have a better relationship with, than as opposed to just kind of do whatever you want. I do wonder, and I also wonder at the same time, do we see another company enter the mix? I don't want to say rumors, but there's a lot of discussion about, like, is there room for a third major company with Ring of Honor going down? Is there someone else that can step up? Will there be a rich person who sees the success that AEW has had and think, I can do that? And how does that impact independent wrestling? What if WWE reverses course and is like, we wanted the indies again? Because I think that could totally happen.
Oh yeah, 100%. Vince is very fickle, and so, like, even this move was kind of just out of nowhere. Like, oh, I just want to change the indie. I just want to change NXT. Just because. And he could be bored of Braun Breaker. It's like, oh, this guy sucks. Kind of like Karrion Kross. He's like, oh, this guy couldn't get over, and so we're just gonna cut him. And so that he's very fickle in that way.
Oh, I see where this is going already. I see they release a bunch of talents, they get rid of the indie guys. Then Vince is like, I need new talent. He goes down to NXT, brings some NXT names up. There are all these green guys that don't know how to work. And it's like, what the hell is going on? Why all these guys suck? It's like, we got to bring in more independent talent. And then we're kind of right back where we started. I don't think, it all depends, I think, on Triple H's role in WWE, which is extremely unclear at the moment, to put it lightly. And, like, he's obviously a big supporter of independent wrestling in the sense that he believes that can mold future wrestlers and future top stars. That's why they were so aggressive in signing guys. NXT was essentially just a well-funded big indie company. Does that could come along and make an impact? Triple H could leave WWE and start his own indie, like super indie, where he just, like, brings in all of his old guys, which I think is unlikely to happen, but would be something. And I do wonder, and I do think that we're still on uncertain ground on the independents at the moment. I think it's nice that talent is becoming more available. I think it's nice that you're starting to see more promotions start up. I think it's nice to see some new promotions get some buzz. Like you mentioned, New Texas Pro. There's that whole kind of group in Austin, Texas, that if you're really into independent wrestling, you're starting to hear about. They've done some collective kind of based shows around WrestleMania weekend. I mentioned Southern Underground Pro in Nashville as another kind of, like, on the rise indie company. West Coast Pro, I think, which is I want to say it's in the Bay Area, I think has been getting buzz. And then you got some companies that are kind of already established super indies, like Defy Wrestling in Seattle. Beyond's a little bit different, but still kind of one of those, like, more well-known independent companies. Obviously, GCW is with the frequency GCW runs, it's almost like not even, it is an indie, but it runs so frequently that it's almost hard to compare it to other indies as far as, like, the amount of shows they have and the fact that they are really, like, a nationally touring company. They're having shows in New Jersey, they're having shows in Florida, they're having shows in California, they're having shows in Wyoming. They're having shows in people's backyards. But, like, there are a lot of indie companies out there that are I think kicking back into gear after maybe taking some time off in the pandemic. But I still think that I'm interested to see how it all shakes out with all this released talent. How often are this Ring of Honor talent that's coming out? Are they going to sign? Are some of them going to sign anywhere? Is Jay Lethal suddenly going to be working a lot of indie dates? Is Matt Taven going to be working indie dates? Is Bandito going to be working a lot of indie dates? I think those are all really important questions, because I think if they are all working a lot of indie dates, the independent scene is completely different. If a lot of those guys are only working, the ROH shows and maybe, like, working for PWG and maybe, like, Defy, I think that's kind of a different scenario in that sense, that maybe that there won't be this big rush of new talent coming to the indies, and there'll be a longer process when it comes to building up new talents.
Yeah, I mean, it's all wait and see right now. Obviously, Ring of Honor, they have their own tapings currently right now. They just released, they just put Final Battle tickets on sale for the general public, and so we'll see how that does. Whether that's going to change what their direction is going to be. And yeah, Final Battle is just next month, and so like all that Ring of Honor stuff, we'll probably see after that. And of course, all these new releases, you know, some of them have 30-day no compete clauses. Some people have 90-day no compete clauses, and so it's going to be a wait and see when those talents start to make the rounds on the indies. But yeah, you know, we could have a whole different conversation about like, you know, like the whole Tony Khan starting a wrestling promotion is unprecedented. Like, you know, someone with that kind of passion and that kind of financial backing is probably never going to be seen again. And so if some rich person does come in, you know, do they have that same passion that Tony Khan has? You know, are people going to be willing to trust this random billionaire like they did with Tony Khan? You know, it's a whole different conversation there. But yeah, just a wait and see of the future of all these talents on the indies.
Yeah, I'm dubious about like the third new wrestling promotion getting taking off, but that's a conversation for a different day. I did want to say real quick about Ring of Honor, kind of their new, you know, they're going to do Final Battle, and then they said they're going to come back like right around WrestleMania weekend time. They even pointed out WrestleMania weekend is like that's when we're going to have our big return.
Yep.
But it seems like you know, they're moving away from exclusive contracts. They seem more like they're going to operate kind of like a super indie in the sense that they're going to have talent coming in on a per date deal. And, you know, that's seen as a step down for Ring of Honor because it is. But I was kind of bullish on this idea that, and we talked about this during our Ring of Honor podcast. And, you know, that podcast either came out at a really good time or really bad time as far as like what we were talking about and what would then transpire with Ring of Honor. But one of the things that I think about is Ring of Honor, by signing everyone to exclusive contracts, lost this flexibility when it came to being on the cutting edge and innovating for wrestling, because you were signing guys to deals, which means that you had all this talent that you had to use and you had to find storylines for them and you had to put them on your shows and everything like that. And they didn't have the freedom to find the next hottest guy and just push them right away. And I think that's what caused like a company like GCW had the freedom to kind of be like, oh, there's this tag team named Top Flight that's, you know, doing good things in Minneapolis. Let's bring them in. And they immediately have this hot new thing, as opposed to Ring of Honor is kind of this, you know, isolationist company that has to use the same talent over and over again because they're signed to contracts. And I do think going to a more like independent style company where you can bring in a new person at each taping and push them if you want to, I think that can really benefit Ring of Honor because they could find somebody that is really good, that is just starting out, that maybe only has a few years of experience. And it does get them back in, I think, a better position to innovate, to find the new thing in wrestling, to find the next great wrestling star, you know, and that's what they used to be like. It used to be like, oh, there's this guy in Iowa named Tyler Black who's getting some pub. Let's bring him in. And, you know, he's a star for them. Or there's these two guys in Quebec named, Kevin Steen and El Generico. Let's bring them in. You know, that's kind of how they operated during their glory days. And I think that they could, by basically becoming an independent company again, potentially operate in the same way where they can just be more flexible as far as who they're pushing and what they have, and not be tied into all of these guys that they feel contractually obligated to have on their show that maybe are stale or maybe just not that good.
Yeah, that's the ironic part for the Ring of Honor situation is that like they could possibly grow even bigger, but also scaling back at the same time. It's kind of that ironic sort of thing where like, you know, they could regain their glory days because of like you said, they have the ability to innovate, they have the ability to be more flexible, but you know, they've kind of lost sort of, you know, the ability to grow bigger in terms of a corporate sort of sense, you know, having these exclusive contracts and having you know, just all these other sort of things to make you a WWE light promotion or like an Impact sort of light promotion. And yeah, you know, they have the ability to, you know, search for different talents. And that's really dependent on who is going to be running, you know, Ring of Honor, you know, who's going to be, you know, the person booking all these indie talents. You know, obviously Gabe Sapolsky was a big factor in Ring of Honor finding all these talents. You know, he was sort of a kingmaker in the indies. I remember John Moxley, he sort of said that, like, you know, he said like, oh, people point out my CCW days, but it wasn't until Gabe Sapolsky booked me on a Ring of Honor show was when I started blowing up and getting WWE's radar. And so who is that person now for Ring of Honor? Who knows? I think Delirious is even taking bookings himself on the indies, and so I don't know if he's going to be still having his executive position in Ring of Honor as well. And so, Joe Koff, I'm sure he's probably thinking about the next steps for Ring of Honor. He has plenty of time to do that, but yeah, they at least have the flexibility to do that in a very ironic sort of sense, while also scaling back.
Yeah, I mean, to me, there are a lot of benefits to being a super indie than being like a third or fourth tier major league promotion. And I'm pretty excited for it. I think we still don't really know what Ring of Honor is going to look like. It could all blow up. The company could be just completely dead. But I am excited for it. And I do think it will benefit independent wrestling again as being with Ring of Honor is back as kind of like, because right now, right, Game Changer Wrestling is kind of the face of independent wrestling.
Yep.
And, as we've said on the show so far, it's kind of have like a pro and con kind of relationship with Game Changer Wrestling. And I think if Ring of Honor can kind of step both backwards from where it was as like a major destination promotion and step forward into this void of kind of like independent wrestling, because they can book, they can be like an Evolve or a Chikara, like we're talking about, a company that can produce real storylines, because they're used to, Delirious is still a booker. They were booking real storylines in Ring of Honor. They're actually doing a really good job booking like long-term storylines, which is something we talked about in the podcast from a few weeks ago. So I do think that they can really benefit, both as a company and like just as independent wrestling as a whole, by kind of scaling back and becoming this, powerful indie group that they really once were, but had kind of stopped being as they became more and more like, corporatized.
Yeah, it's a super interesting, exciting time for the indies. Not only just with the talent boom, but I guess I'm a big part because of the talent boom. But just a lot of possibilities can happen. Like you said, Ring of Honor could easily just fail in this new vision of what they're trying to do. Maybe Joe Koff and everyone else has the completely wrong idea of what they want to do with Ring of Honor, and just chooses a completely different direction and just tanks the company, which would be very tragic. Hopefully that doesn't happen. But the likelihood of possibilities is in there, and obviously every other promotion, they're starting to get their legs underneath themselves. Mentioned before, Beyond Wrestling, they're back to running weekly television on WTV, and they're running all these big shows, booking big names, and all the other promotions as well are finding their footing as well. And so it's very interesting and exciting to see what happens next, these next couple of months heading into WrestleMania weekend.
Yeah, and so with that, I think that's pretty much all we got today. We'll be back again in 2 weeks. We're still debating about what topic we're going to do, and of course, something crazy could happen over those 2 weeks, Jason, and we don't even know it yet. But we will be back in 2 weeks talking about something. But again, appreciate everyone who's been watching these. Like, comment, subscribe, all of those kind of things that these big YouTubers say. Smash that like button. We're a wrestling podcast, so we got to say like body slam that like button, pile drive,
super kick that like button,
one wing angel that like kick button. What's like I'm trying to think like a really complicated move.
Canadian Destroyer.
Canadian Destroyer. Button. What was the do you remember the El Generico used to do Kenta Kobashi's Orange Crush, but he would like do it differently where he'd like hold the guy in like a front face lock, and then like it had like this unbelievably complicated move, which it was named, which was like this like double underhook cradle front face lock Orange Crush. Like, so do that to the subscribe button.
Yes.
But thanks a lot, everyone. Okay, and we will be back in a few weeks.